Welcome to the Steering Change Podcast, navigating through the commercial transportation industry in Alberta and beyond, powered by the Alberta Motor Transport Association. Here's your host, Kelsey Hipkin.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to today's episode. As a commercial transportation association, we often get a lot of calls with questions about anything to do with commercial transportation in Alberta and even beyond. We do a lot of outreach for what industry wants to know most. A lot of that falls on our member services team, one of which is joining us today. I'm going to get to him in a second. We do always encourage folks to reach out, so be sure to check out our show notes. We will have some information there for contacting various people for what you might need. And to that end, I would like to introduce today's guest. We have Industry Advisor, Safety and Compliance with AMTA and author of AMTA's ProTech and Proactive, Understanding and Leveraging the World of Safety Technology to Move Beyond Compliance-Focused Safety Management. It's a mouthful, but it is also chock full of awesome information, and we'll have access to that in the show notes for you as well. Before I introduce Dave, I wanted to let everyone know we did reach out to folks via our social media channels, and we also gathered a bunch of FAQs that we often get from members who give us a shout or contact us via email. We're calling this Ask the SME. For those who don't know, SME is subject matter expert, and the person to my left here is who we call AMTA's human ChatGPT. So I am pleased to welcome Dave Elniski. Dave, thanks for joining us once again.
No worries. Yeah, I think the next book title, maybe I'll shorten that up a little bit. It should be a one-breath title.
Maybe a smidge. We made it work. Okay, to start, Dave, for those who might not know, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Dave Elniski. I work for AMTA as their advisor in safety and compliance. I guess this is all ours. So our advisor in safety and compliance. Big part of my role is kind of acting like not really a consultant, but probably like a coach, I guess, in both occupational health and safety and transportation-specific safety. So the national safety code stuff that carriers have to do in addition to OHS, both federally and provincially. So US DOT and really whatever carriers need to operate and to navigate the regulations. So a lot of my role is working externally with people who maybe a one-off call or sometimes coaching somebody over a longer period of time, they're implementing something. And then a lot of the work I do as well is internal. So helping our education team review content, being on the podcast, and things like that, kind of working on developing resources. And so that's my role at AMTA. I've been here just about 5 years now. And then alongside this, separately but very related, I guess, I'm doing my PhD in public health at the University of Saskatchewan, where I'm studying.
Dr. Dave.
One day. Not the kind that we have a shortage of, so, well, it is what it is. Public, it's close anyways. But anyways, I can't prescribe medication, but I will be able to prescribe safety practices.
Oh, how long did you work on that one?
Too long. At a hotel all last night. No kids. So.
Nailed it.
Anyways, so I hated that program anyways. I'm studying the relationship between different parts of a safety management system and its impact on long-haul truck driver health, wellness, and safety. So I used to be a long-haul trucker myself. I did that for a number of years before getting into safety management, and then eventually here, AMTA. And I don't know, I really do like the work that I get to do. I really do. I'm very fortunate in that regard, but I'm curious about it as well. So yeah, it just happens to be what I'm doing there and what I'm doing here are quite related. And yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for coming, Dave. And a lot of those elements that you just mentioned are going to tie heavily into the questions that we are asking you today. Okay, let's dive in. Dave, question number 1. How do the rules for fire extinguishers work for commercial vehicles in Alberta?
And fire extinguisher, that's a oddly complicated one. It really is, and especially if you're a company that also operates in the U.S., because there are different rules in Canada, the U.S. for commercial vehicles. I guess it really depends on what work the company is doing. Mm-hmm. Like if you operate in the U.S., you have to have, for the most part, your vehicle, regardless of what it's hauling, has to have a fire extinguisher on it. In Canada, it's more related to transportation of dangerous goods, and it can be tricky to figure out because it's, the specifics are like in a standard that is in the legislation. But really, so when I'm typically dealing with this question with carriers, I won't say, well, that you need a 5 pound or you need this type or whatever. It's more about what is the work you do? Mm-hmm. What are the hazards? And then in addition to that, we have to consider occupational health and safety. So it might be the case that, well, maybe the truck in question is supporting some other business activity. Maybe it's a welding vehicle, something like that. There might be other reasons that influence why a certain type of fire extinguisher or their protection is needed. So really, yeah, we have a bulletin that I put together on this that talks sort of about the minimum, like that kind of emergency safety equipment you have to have in your vehicle. So I'd recommend people look at that on our website. And if there, any questions about it, reach out, because that one, for whatever reason, it's not as simple as like, oh, you got a vehicle, it's a commercial truck over 4,500 kilograms, you need this. It's it's a weird one. So.
Okay, great. And for our listeners, Dave did mention our bulletins. We do have an extensive resource tab on our website. We'll have Robin put that in the show notes for you guys as well. Dave, next question. And I have no idea about the answer for this one. Coveralls versus overalls. How can I best identify the right PPE for drivers?
Well, couple of different things to consider there. So I guess, first of all, coveralls versus overalls. For generally, anyways, coveralls would be your ankles to wrists up to your neck. Whereas overalls might be more like what sometimes bibs or like what you, so you don't have sleeves.
Over the shoulder and your legs
over
are covered.
the shoulder. Yeah. Sometimes, depending on what the company does, they'll have very specific requirements. For example, let's say you haul a certain type of product and you have to go onto a site and the customer says you must have, flame resistant coveralls. Well, then you have to have that to work for them.
Yeah.
So I always will ask carriers to say, well, your customer sites, your requirement, like the work you do might be why you have to do something. And the answer might not always be in the regulations. So beyond that, it depends on, whether you're provincially regulated, federally regulated. There are, in our occupational health and safety rules in Canada, whether you're federal or provincial in Alberta, some things that are prescribed. But a lot of it really comes down to the employer's responsible to understand the hazards in their operations and take the right steps from that point onwards. So, if we're talking coveralls and overalls, okay, well, what work are they doing? Are they going to are they likely to be snagged on something? Is this the kind of thing where we're worried about, maybe our drivers aren't wearing their PPE because it's time consuming to put on? Well, then maybe coveralls that can just really quickly, easily get onto. You've got your high vis and all this kind of stuff covered. Maybe that's a good solution. But really, unless there is a prescriptive requirement, it really comes down to, well, what are the hazards we do? What makes sense? But then also, what do our people want?
Absolutely. And those OHS rules that you mentioned, are those easily found online?
No, kind of, yes. Depends on the jurisdiction. And that is something that, yes, you can find it online.
Yeah.
But do not trust AI overviews, things like that. You have to go to the source. You have to, if you're referencing legislation and you're not pulling it right from the government website, right from that document, you got to verify.
Fantastic. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. How do I know if I'm federally or provincially regulated?
Yeah, okay, and that's another good one too. This is a common question I get. First of all, there's two kinds of regulation when we talk about federal versus provincial. So if you're a carrier and you have to have a safety fitness certificate, then you have to decide in Alberta anyways if you're going to get a federal safety fitness or a provincial safety fitness. And those are relatively easy to determine, because if you operate a vehicle outside of Alberta over 4,500 kilograms, then you must have a safety fitness certificate, and it must be federal. But in Alberta, the weight threshold is higher. It's up to 11,794 kilograms and higher. Is the point at which your freight carrying vehicles have to then, the company has to have a safety fitness certificate to operate. They can choose to be provincial at that point, but then may not leave the province with any vehicles over 4,500, because that's when the federal rules would click in. But so really, as long as the company knows, okay, so we're either, if we know we're staying in Alberta or we might have to leave, that's a part of it, then you that's really your federal versus provincial. And if you operate buses and passenger carrying vehicles, it's 11 plus, including the driver, regardless. Okay. Now that is only talking about transportation. That's your national safety code. There's also OHS to consider in labor. So whether you're provincially or federally regulated as a company, your occupational health and safety and your employment and labor regulations are going to be the same in the sense that if you are federal, you're going to follow federal for both, and if you're provincial, follow provincial for both. But this is not as black and white. Like with the safety fitness, it is. You know the weights of your vehicle and where you're going. You know if you're provincial or you know if you're federal. With occupational health and safety and labor, though, it depends on what the business does.
Okay.
So trucking interprovincially and hauling passengers and freight interprovincially is a federal thing. But it's not necessarily the case that if your company does a little bit of that work, that all of your organization is going to be federally regulated. So again, this is another one where I just want to talk to the company specifically, try and work with them on that. And where you can go for support, you can contact the Canada Labour Program, and they can help you make a determination. But it's important to clarify that really, I mean, you can even go get a legal opinion on it, but at the end of the day, the only true authority on this matter would be, a judge making the determination. Because the ways our laws work here with trucking, and I guess they weren't really thinking about, trucking back in, the 1800s, and they were, drafting a lot of this kind of stuff. So it was, it is just a complex area, and there's so again, that's one where I like to work with the company directly. But if you're a long haul trucking company and that's really what you do as your primary means of business, your trucks are going all over Canada, maybe all over the US, and all the operations that you have within Alberta are supporting that. You've got an office and a shop and stuff. Probably that's all federally regulated, both from a safety fitness certificate perspective and then also for OHS and labor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now one that I know is a bit near and dear to your heart. What is psychological health and safety, and what do companies have to do about it?
Yeah, so psychological health and safety, it's you might have heard of psychological safety and the do I feel safe at work to speak my mind and share my opinion and have that received well. That's not the same as psychological health and safety. They're certainly related. Yeah. Because a workplace culture where you can speak freely and you can dissent and we can consider alternate viewpoints versus one where you can't. That is a factor in how comfortable you are at work. But also, psychological health and safety is OHS that include, but specifically talking about mental health. So psychological health and safety, I guess, is really what an employer does to reduce the risk from hazards that could cause a psychological injury or illness. So employers in Canada, if you're in Alberta, for example, whether you're provincially or federally regulated, you have things to do in this space. There are compliance requirements. There's sort of a overarching, obligation for employers to take steps nowadays to not only protect the physical health and safety of their workforce and the people who might be affected by their work, like the public who are in the vicinity of their operations, but also now the psychological component as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is part of it. So that's, and we have a resource on that as well too. We've got, so this space we can help there as well too. This is a relatively recent development. I mean, it's been around for a while, but still a lot of companies are trying to figure it out. So, but in a nutshell, that's what it is. It's like, instead of now, okay, we're worried about a person's physical health and safety. Also now we're worried about their mental health.
Additional layer. Yeah. Absolutely.
And taking steps to improve it. Yeah.
So, Dave, what is a safety fitness certificate, and how do I know if I need one?
Alrighty. Well, a safety fitness certificate is it's like a company's version of a driver's license.
Okay.
You can't operate a commercial vehicle as a company over these certain thresholds until you have a safety fitness certificate. So in Canada, it's over 4,500 kilograms, commercial vehicle that's hauling freight, or a passenger vehicle with a seating capacity of 11 people or more that includes the driver that operates interprovincially, must have a safety fitness certificate, a federal one. In some provinces like Alberta, they make separate rules where if you stay within the province, then you're not necessarily under federal jurisdiction. So then you can, the province can make different rules for its own industry. Yeah. So in Alberta, you can choose to get a provincial safety fitness certificate. You have to keep your vehicles over 4,500 kilograms and 11 plus folks in the province, because if you leave, then the federal rules would click in. So that 4,500 to the higher threshold does confuse people sometimes. But if you're staying within the province and your vehicles with a gross vehicle weight of over 11,793 kilograms are the ones that if you operate one or more of those types of vehicles, then you have to have a safety fitness certificate to be able to do it. So that's really kind of what just allows the company. It is the base level of like operating authority you need. It's not the only thing a company needs. There's a lot of other things to still operate as a carrier, but that's what a safety fitness certificate is.
Does it mean anything different if you're an owner operator versus a carrier?
Well, it guess it depends on what we mean by owner operator, because I mean that in the industry that term gets used kind of inconsistently. Like it might be used to describe a driver who owns their truck, but it's contracted to one company, and that company has a safety fitness certificate and gets the registration on the truck and everything. So so that would be in that case the owner operator in that case. They don't have to do that, but they are basically considered a company driver as far as like Alberta transportation would be concerned, or the regulator would be concerned. But if an owner operator operates their own vehicle themselves, independent of another company, and it meets these thresholds, then they'd have to have their own safety fitness, and that would be a true like one person, one vehicle trucking company.
Okay,
carrier.
Great. What is a carrier profile, and do I need it?
Well, on the carrier profile, whether or not you need one, you just get one if you have a safety fitness certificate. And like how the safety fitness certificate is like a company's driver's license, the carrier profile is like that company's driver's abstract.
Okay.
So any organization that gets a safety fitness certificate, the province to which that where they got their safety fitness certificate will automatically generate for them an carrier profile.
Okay.
And that is something they can access online. In Alberta, there's no charge. You can access it whenever you want to. And it lists information related to safety performance, but on-road safety performance. So inspections from law enforcement of vehicles, tickets, impaired charges, collisions, these things are all tracked on the carrier profile. And then they are, I can get into more details on it, but basically it just kind of summarizes the on-road safety performance of a carrier. So it's useful to the company because it's another tool that the government's provided, and it's also useful to the government because they can sort of triage carriers based on who they deem to be the riskiest, and it's useful for shippers and organizations as well that are trying to choose a carrier with which they want to partner, because if they request parts of the carrier profile, then get a little bit of an insight into how that company's performing.
Okay, great. Now, we have touched on one of these a bit, but we'll ask it anyways. What do NSC and OHS mean?
So NSC, that stands for National Safety Code, and OHS stands for Occupational Health and Safety. NSC, it's like an industry colloquialism. We just use this to say, we generally use that to refer to the rules that apply to carriers, trucking and busing companies. So, if you operate a fleet of vehicles that meets these weight or passenger thresholds when the NSC rules kick in, then we call them NSC vehicles. So that's kind of how we use the term. Now, NSC officially refers to a set of 16 standards that the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators basically develops, publishes, maintains. And the federal government then makes it a requirement that each province use those standards either by adopting them or drafting their legislation in alignment with them to regulate their carriers. So that's what it is officially, but we kind of use that term to mean all the safety rules and even like non-safety, like vehicle registration type rules that are related to carriers specifically. OHS, on the other hand, occupational health and safety, not just carriers have OHS responsibilities. Pretty much all companies do. And again, there's federal and provincial regulations that, depending on what the company does. OHS, though, carriers have to do OHS as well. And they also have NSC, similar to how if they do other types of work as well, like maybe they also transport dangerous goods, they're a tanker company, well, then they also have the TDG, the Transportation of Dangerous Goods regulations to manage. So that's kind of there. So it's all safety related, but OHS is for everybody. And NSC is then if you're also a carrier.
Great. Thanks, Dave. What is the difference between hours of service and fatigue management?
So hours of service just refers to the sort of the minimums and the maximums for, how much a professional driver can work in a certain amount of time and how much time they must have at a minimum off duty before they can work again. And there's different rules if you're federal or provincial, But they basically, hours of service is like, that is the government's safety net, basically.
Yeah.
We've known for a long time that, fatigue is a hazard when we drive.
Yeah.
So, for many, many decades now, Canada's had these requirements in place that all drivers have to maintain a logbook, and now it's an electronic logging device for most carriers. And that is like, you have to comply with those rules.
Mm-hmm.
But fatigue management is different. Fatigue management is, a fatigue management program would include hours of service, compliance and monitoring and management, but it would go further and look at an organization's operations and try to make changes based on like sleep science, essentially, to make sure that the work we're asking people to do is done in a way that is as conducive as possible to them being rested.
And can that fatigue management tie back into that psychosocial safety that we were talking about earlier?
Definitely, yeah. And it's probably really the only part of NSC that would be related to psychological health and safety. Because rested is, we're happier when we're rested. There's that part of it. It's less stressed. And but it really, a company that's moving from, okay, we've got our hours of service figured out, we're happy in that space.
Yeah.
Moving into fatigue management is going to require them to look at the hours of service rules, not just as like, well, that's what I should be able to get out of a driver.
Yeah.
It's more about that. That is a safety net. Now you have to turn to resources and literature on, fatigue management to decide what we can do in our own organization to just to improve our working conditions from that angle. And there's resources, for a carrier. There's the North American Fatigue Management Program, NAFMP. Yeah,
nailed it.
There we go. Yeah, beauty. NAFMP, not much of a. But anyways, I'm gonna get that to catch on. Anyways, it's the CVSA, the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, maintains that now. But that is NAFMP.org, I want to say. But if you Google North American Fatigue Management Program, you'll
we'll
find
put it in the show notes too.
Yeah,
there's a lot of acronyms in industry.
It is, yeah, and it's a good one though. It's meant for carriers. It's been around for a while. It was developed by experts in the early 2000s. It's been updated since, and it's just available for people to use. You don't have to invent it yourself.
Fantastic. Now, we've kind of touched on one of these, but let's break it all down. What do terms like company driver, lease operator, contract driver, owner operator, etc. mean?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. So basically, they just all of those terms, I guess, are referring to different labor or employment agreements between a carrier and a driver. So, when I say employee, I mean somebody who works for an organization, gets a T4 from them, every tax year. So, an employee. That's what a company driver would be. That's what typical. So when somebody says company driver, they're meaning like, an employee driver. Employee driver would be the same thing. But lease operator and owner operator, contract driver, those are all terms to describe a driver that's working for the company as a contractor. And then they differ based on, contract driver, I guess, could just, like, that's pretty general. It just means a driver who is a contractor. But generally when we say lease operator, we're talking about somebody who's like leased to a company. So this is typically a driver who they will be a contractor.
Okay.
They will own their vehicle, but they can only drive it for that company under that company's control. So the company's providing the safety fitness certificate, the insurance, the safety program, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas owner operator, sometimes we'll say, a true owner operator would be someone who, they own their vehicle, independent of any other organization. They have their own safety fitness and insurance and everything. They need to operate as a carrier. So one person, one vehicle, trucking company, busing company. And an owner operator like that could choose perhaps to sign a contract with one carrier and, haul for them exclusively, or they might really work with carriers like a true business to business relationship. And that is where, so it's really bit of a spectrum, and there's not like a well-accepted standard use of these terms, but that's kind of what they mean. But generally owner operator implies a little bit more, either somebody who's completely independent or more independent from a company. Yeah. Sometimes lease operators, or lease operator agreements will be of the kind where the driver's, works as a contractor, and then they're like leasing or purchasing the truck from the same company they're driving for, and they're making payments on it or something like that. One thing I will say about that is that that's often not done legally. So, you know, at AMTA, we talk about driver rank, employee misclassification. So when a driver works with a carrier like that, and they don't really own the vehicle outright, have the bill of sale, something like that, it is important to make sure that that is all being done properly. Yeah. Because sometimes there are tax and labor abuses that take place when that's people are misclassified, because there's a financial incentive to do it. Mm-hmm. You know, if you claim to be a contractor when you're actually probably an employee, you know, you're going to probably pay less tax and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You're also not going to have as many protections, and it often is bad for both parties, especially if they get caught. So that's what we just a cautionary thing there anyways. Yeah.
Shameless plug, we do have some really great videos on Driver Inc. on our YouTube channel. So for those who are listening and want to learn more about Driver Inc., we will share that with you in the show notes.
Yeah, those are done really well. And all three of them kind of walk through what it is, also what's wrong with it, why we've taken the stance we've taken. So yeah, definitely great to check out. So.
All right, rolling into, in industry, we hear terms like ticket, citation, charge, conviction, and violation to describe negative things. What can these mean, and are they different from each other?
Yeah, so I guess, another one, confusing language. All of those refer to, generally, it's a driver has had an interaction with law enforcement that has not been positive. It's resulted in something. But what that something is, for the average driver, not a commercial driver, typically they're often just familiar with like either I got a verbal warning, like they let me go, or I got a ticket. Yeah. And a ticket is a charge. What a ticket is a peace officer has charged you with breaking a law. They've written it down on that ticket. When you pay that ticket, you've admitted guilt. And that is the point at which you're convicted, or you fight it in court and lose now, and then you get convicted in court. So that's kind of what those. So a ticket, charge, conviction, they're all related. So on a carrier profile or a driver's abstract, when you get a ticket, that does not show up, but it does show up once you're convicted. Okay. So if you're disputing it, for example, I don't think I should receive this ticket. All the time you're working through the court system or however you do that, it's kind of it's in carrier profile purgatory for a while until either it's absolved or either it gets tossed or you get convicted and then it'll show up. Violation has a couple different meanings. One is that there's a violation section in a carrier profile in Alberta which documents violations that don't impact your R factor. So there's not like points assigned to them that impact how the company is like how its R factor is scored.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, and this is for my own knowledge.
Yeah, no worries.
Can you also explain R factor?
Yeah, for sure. So R factor, actually, I should have touched on that when we were talking about carrier profile. So the R factor, risk factor is what it means, and it's a numerical score on a carrier profile, and it's the government creates a calculation for it, and basically, depending on how many points the company has from its convictions, so tickets that have been paid, any impaired charges, inspections by law enforcement officers on the vehicles, commercial vehicle safety alliance inspections, and collisions. All of those have different points based on severity, and then that's used based on the company's fleet count and some other factors to provide this score. Ah, okay. And super useful to the government because then it allows them to identify what are the the worst carriers, and then we can target our enforcement action accordingly, their enforcement action accordingly, and it's useful for companies because then you can see where you stand. So that's the R factor, and it's impacted, but the violation section on an Alberta carrier profile doesn't actually impact the R factor. Okay, but it's still useful because at least you can see this thing happened, and it should be some takeaways there for safety management purposes. But really, all of these things are violations. Like that's probably the most broadly used term. Yeah. Like we've broken some safety rule, some safety law. They're all bad, but that's kind of that's typically how they're recorded. And then there's also sometimes depends a bit on the jurisdiction, but when you get an inspection by a commercial vehicle safety alliance officer, or they don't employ the officers, but anyways, an officer who is trained to do those inspections, they have their own like inspection documentation that results that, so it impacts the carrier profile, but it's like, and it goes in a commercial abstract, but it doesn't go in a personal abstract. So those often we call those, like often those are just referred to as, you got a CVSA violation.
Yeah.
Well, typically, so when someone's saying that, they mean they had an inspection, the officer found something wrong with the vehicle or the driver's, documents or something, and put it on paper, and now the company. So does that cover all of those ones?
I think so.
Yeah.
I feel informed. Okay, this one might be a bit broad, but what do I need in my safety program?
Yeah, that is broad. A lot. But again, and it depends on what the company does. And I mean, I could pretty much leave it at that. But I guess, well, the first thing, I mean, OHS, Occupational Health and Safety. So the company, whether, first of all, they need to know if they're federally or provincially regulated, so they know what legislation they have to follow. Mm-hmm. So first of all, what is in the legislation that applies to the company must be part of the safety program.
Yeah.
Have to meet those requirements. And then if you're a carrier and you have a safety fitness certificate, then you're also, you've got those regulations to follow as well. Mm-hmm. A National Safety Code program generally includes, your hours of service component, files on your drivers, files on your vehicles, a safety program with transportation-specific stuff, and other things, and accordingly, depending on what the company does. So if you haul dangerous goods, you have to have that reflected in your safety program. But this is all legislation, talking about here. So these are that's what you must have at a minimum. But it is important to note that OHS is less prescriptive than NSC. And what I mean by that is that, regardless whether you're provincial or federal, you have as an employer the responsibility to kind of examine your operations as a company, try to identify, where are there hazards, and then take action to either eliminate the hazards or control them so they pose less risk to the people they might impact.
Okay.
That's it's not worded exactly like that, but that's basically what you have to do. So safety programs not only are just do all these things, the law says it's a checklist. They have to sit, company has to sit down, think critically about what it is, look at its operations at a regular basis, and take action based on their own observations and also what their peers are doing.
Yeah.
Maybe your company has never had this kind of negative incident. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened in the industry though. Mm-hmm. So, part of a safety program as well is just, trying to be duly diligent. And that does require not just treating the legislation like a checklist and also doing this additional sort of more proactive work.
Yeah, living it.
Exactly, yeah.
What do Canadian carriers have to do if they want to start running into the U.S.?
Well, so a lot of things. And again, depends on what the company does. But at a minimum, first of all, you need to get a U.S. DOT compliant safety program in place. Mm-hmm. So the company has to get a U.S. DOT number. It has to implement. I mean, if it's got a good NSC program, it'll already have done a lot of these things, but it has to, its driver files will have to they're a little bit different, the requirements in the U.S. And, so I have to make sure they're, complying with both sets of regulations. The hours of service are different. So they have to make sure that when their drivers are going to the U.S., that not only are they following the American rules when they're in the U.S. and the Canadian rules when they're in Canada, but that before they go into either country, they're compliant. Mm-hmm. So you might have taken how much rest you need in Canada to drive and then cross the border, change your electronic logging device to U.S. rules and see that you have to take 10 hours now because you didn't take enough to put on before. So hours of service is one they have to consider. And that's basically your basic U.S. DOT program. And the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the FMCSA, which is a part of the U.S. DOT, the U.S. Department of Transportation, oversees trucking, busing carriers. And they have this really cool tool on their website called the Motor Carrier Safety Planner, which is, you can go on free to use. And it's meant to sort of show you this is what you have to do to be compliant. So that's kind of the minimum. But then other things companies have to consider when they go to the U.S., though, are things like, you have a drug and alcohol testing program. Mm-hmm. that have different requirements for drivers entering the U.S. So, and in cannabis is a big one because that the way that the testing is done and everything, you can't really use cannabis in any capacity.
Yeah.
And drive commercially in the U.S. I can't say no. You can't really. No, you can't. That is
Hard
clear.
no.
And you can't in Alberta either, really, because the Alberta IRS program. But so that's something that employers have to consider. Then there's the commodity specific stuff and the border stuff. So your driver has to be able to legally enter the U.S. They need the right documentation, like passport or whatever they have to. So that the individual person has to be the right individual to be able to enter. So the company has to make sure that they're tracking that. They'll also have to, depending on what they're hauling, there might be additional requirements. So, they might need to they'll have to work with a customs broker typically to make sure the load is clear in the sense that it is legal to enter the U.S. All the OKs, all these different things being paid, all these certifications are in place depending on what the cargo is. So it's not so much the carrier necessarily will have to do all that. Generally, the shipper and a customs broker do most of that work, but the carrier still has to be involved in the process and not send their driver to the border until they're able to go. So there's making sure that the commodity, we've got that figured out, and also that we understand how the border works. So those are some of the considerations, and then beyond that, it just depending on what the company does, it can get more and more complex or simpler and that kind of stuff.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dave, tell me some ELD best practices. That is electronic logging device best practices.
Well, they're required if you're a carrier and you're a federal carrier in Canada or you operate in the U.S. So, the majority of companies in Canada, carriers in Canada would have to use them. In terms of best practices, I mean, this is really a best practice, but a lot of companies still mess it up. First of all, do the things you're supposed to do. You have to choose an ELD that's certified by Transport Canada, and it's got to be listed on their website, not just the manufacturer, but the specific make and model, all that kind of stuff. That is a compliance requirement, but that does get missed at times. Or a best practice for sure is understanding the ELD rules outside of just what you're being told by an ELD salesperson.
Yeah.
Not knocking any ELD salesperson or ELD company, but there's obviously opportunity for bias there. So really, you can't delegate your safety responsibilities as an organization, like a senior management. But just the ELD provider said they'd handle all that stuff for us.
Yeah.
No, you have to know and do all the right things. So you can't really. So that's a big one right there. Is first of all making sure, do we have an understanding of how all this is supposed to work, so that we can double check what the salesperson is telling us. So that's a best practice there. And the other one I would probably touch on is just understanding what data you're gathering.
Okay.
Chances are your ELD is gathering more data than you need just for compliance purposes. So it can be useful to see, well, what other features does it have?
Yeah.
Can we use this data to better manage our organization instead of, that's, and also just making sure that we also understand what data we're collecting and we're not, perhaps collecting data that's showing maybe some dangerous trends that we're not doing anything about, that in an investigation later could be a liability and certainly a missed opportunity to improve our safety performance proactively. So those would be probably, some off the top of the head, best practices anyways.
Great. Thank you. Can I leave Alberta as a carrier with a provincial SFC?
No, you may not. Well, if your vehicle's under 4,500 kilograms, if it's not a, federally regulated NSC vehicle, you can. But there's no permit. There is no thing you can do to be a company with a provincial safety fitness certificate and take those vehicles outside of Alberta.
Okay.
And this gets confusing because when I say permit, there's lots of different kinds of permits.
Yeah.
So if you contact British Columbia, Saskatchewan, you can get a permit, a registration permit to be able to do a trip as a commercial carrier. But and they will give you the permit, but it's not up to them to make sure everything else your company's doing is compliant.
Yeah.
You have to have the federal safety fitness certificate to be able to do that. So even though you might be contacting a permitting authority in another jurisdiction and they're saying, you got your registration permit, sounds like you're good to go, No, if you don't have the federal safety fitness, you can't. So that one is pretty black and white. And in the most recent version of Government of Alberta's compliance manual for carriers, it is like a little nice, very obvious text box and a very obvious location stating, no, there's no permit for this. So it's pretty, you can't.
Let's cross the border again for a minute. How do I dispute something from the U.S. that's not a ticket but is impacting my American safety scores?
So like in Canada, where you got a carrier profile, as soon as you get a US DOT number, you get the American version of the same thing. And it's similar in spirit, but it is a little bit different in how it works. But basically, if you get something on a CVSA officer's report impacts your company, there's a process through the FMCSA called the data queues process, and that is what you do. You go online, and there's a system they have where you basically you appeal it.
Okay.
And you say, well, this is what happened, and this is in it. And basically, you're working with the regulator there to make your case, and then they will consider it and yes or no. And I've done that I've disputed tickets in court, on behalf of drivers. I've on behalf of companies disputed other types of violations in Canada. And I've done the data queues process in the US a lot too. And I don't know. I've found it to be a pretty good process, fair, generally speaking. In the as far as in the experience I've had with it, got some, won some, lost some, but there is a process, and you just do it through one place.
Okay, great. Now let's move to the trucks themselves a little bit. Do drivers actually have to check their brake adjustments?
Yeah, you do, and this is one where it's pretty, I don't know, it was a long haul. When I was a trucker myself, it was pretty rare that I would ever see anybody under their vehicle doing an inspection at that level of detail. And it's just not something people commonly do, but you are still responsible for that as a driver. So if you get an inspection, like a level 1 inspection, where they're checking brake adjustments, things like that, and they find there's an issue with it, well, you will be held accountable for it. And it is the expectation from law enforcement. Yeah, that's part of your job as a commercial driver, is making sure that's all in order. So it is a response. It is a requirement. That one there, I'd be happy, if companies want to reach out and chat more about that one. And how that can kind of be done and streamlined and everything. But that is part of it.
Okay, so this next one, as a passenger driver, I frequently drive into BC. They clearly have signage. You need winter tires or chains as of October 1st. Should we require drivers to use tire chains?
Well, that is a separate decision from carrying them. And you have to do the thing of carrying the chains. And depending on where you go, because not just BC that has rules for carrying chains and using them a certain way. Yeah. You not only have to have them during whatever seasons and time periods they say you have to, you also, when you use them, and BC has rules for how you have to put them on a vehicle at a minimum as well, like which tires and axles and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, maybe if I phrase it this way, is there a time when or when not to chain?
Definitely, and that's where it's so yes, you have this requirement to carry them and use them a certain way if you use them, but I would never recommend a carrier just make that a blanket policy that we require our drivers to chain up. I mean, if you have to, there's some places where, you pretty much will have to if you're doing off-road work. If you run the Salmo Creston Hill, the Kootenai Pass in BC, regularly. You're going to have to chain to be able to do some types of work in the industry. But for the most part, I'm speaking both as somebody, as just my personal experience as a trucker, and then also, as a safety professional now. Generally speaking, it's good to avoid it because first of all, there's often not a lot of time savings. You're going to be driving. It's going to take time to put them on, take time to put them off. Obviously, road conditions are going to be bad anyways. You're not going to be going fast with chains on. Someone might have an issue and then get, the road closed. So, a lot of the time it's if I'm looking at my logbook and I was a driver, I might have even 3 hours left, but it's not worth chaining up because I'm not going to get very far down the road. And if I just stop now, maybe the plows will get to it overnight and maybe I won't have to. Or if I do have to, I'm now doing it rested and I can, approach it with more confidence. Also, it's a dangerous activity. It's often done roadside or in a busy truck pullout or something like that. So it's an additional risky thing to have to do. And also tire chains are heavy. Like I said, at triples, easily over 100 pounds. I mean, like, it's a lot of work to put the things on.
Yeah.
And, you know, so to just make drivers do it, if you have to, then that needs to be kind of factored into, you know, what it means to be a driver at that company. But no, I generally don't recommend it because it's just introduces a lot of additional hazards, opportunities for injury, for, you know, and often it's going to cost a lot of money. You're going to wreck the chains, wreck the tires. It's often not worth it. So it's better to plan trips and watch the weather and do what we can to avoid those kinds of things in the first place.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this is our last question. However, if any of our listeners do have any other questions in regards to anything that we've covered today, again, that contact information will be in the show notes. So Dave, final question. What does a carrier need to do for training drivers? Another broad one, but if you could break down some Cole's notes on that one.
Yeah, I get this question a fair bit, and I'm gonna guess that what's being asked there is like, you know, what do I have to do? I'm a trucking company. I'm hiring a driver. What do I need to do? There is a requirement when you hire a driver. You know, there's under the NSC rules, just to use the broad term there, you have to train your employees and your drivers in all applicable safety rules. And it really is quite that broad. And you know, so what that typically means and how this is generally interpreted is cargo securement training, hours of service, inspecting vehicles, rules of the road, weights and dimensions, these kinds of NSC topics. And you have to provide this training upon hiring, and this should be provided before people are actually doing the work. So, but that's kind of like the minimum NSC compliance answer. You also have to consider OHS, because there will, depending on, you know, for OHS purposes, there's going to be training requirements likely as well. The company has to train on their own procedures, their safe work practices, this kind of stuff. So there's that to consider. So during orientation and onboarding, there's this kind of compliance-based and initial training. There should then also be ongoing training, though.
Yeah.
It's, you know, unfortunately, you know, it's companies kind of just treat this like a checkbox, but it's like, you know, the purpose of this training is to make people aware of what the rules are and how to comply with them and how to stay safe. So, you know, it might be the case that like, okay, well, if maybe you do like, maybe the company does van work, like, you know, enclosed trailers mostly. But they use like an online an online cargo securement course that pretty much just uses like a flatbed truck as the model the whole time. Okay, so you could take that training and get the certificate and probably not have any issues in an audit, depending on how deeply the auditor looks. But that's not really doing much. It's the wrong vehicle. It's the wrong application. And at the end of the day, the company is responsible for knowing its operations, knowing what hazards exist, and knowing what its people have to do to stay safe. So, you know, so you have to train, first of all, to the equipment you're using and the conditions you're using. So maybe you can do some online training to, you know, simplify a lot of things. You know, get the theory, get the foundational stuff, get the knowledge, but this needs to generally be supplemented with like some in-yard training, some hands-on, and then monitoring, and then like ongoing and recurring training to reinforce key things, seasonal things like, oh, winter's coming, so let's reinforce some of those things. So there's a lot more to it based on the company's operations than just the minimums, but I think that's probably how I'd answer that one.
Fantastic. Okay, I am going to segue into winding down. So, Dave, is there anything else you would like to add? What is the best way people can contact you should they have questions beyond what we've covered today?
Well, in terms of contacting me, my AMTA email, feel free to reach out. I mean, there is a lot of, I wish sometimes these questions I could just say, this is the answer.
Yes.
And sometimes that is the case.
Exactly, but some go much deeper.
It really does, and I think it's not me trying to be non-committal. It's not me trying to avoid, you know, the personal risk of like saying something incorrect. It's just like safety management is a dynamic, complicated thing. It's not. We have rules to prescribe these minimums based on historical experiences and the public and governments noting that like, oh, wow, yeah, like people are crashing their trucks because they're tired. We should probably have rules about that.
Ever evolving.
Yeah, but these are minimum reactive kinds of things, you know, to really manage safety properly. It is a more complicated thing. So it's fine to be confused. just means that whatever that feeling of confusion is, that should be an indicator to, it's time to go reach out and find some help.
Yeah, taking a little.
And we're one of those sources.
Fantastic. Dave, as always, really appreciate you being here today. I am going to wrap up with some AMTA news, my friends. A quick safety note to start. Next Friday is October 31st, Halloween. If driving passenger-wise in neighborhoods, what say you? Please be sure to keep an eye out for all the ghosts and ghouls that might be roaming the streets looking for treats. I would also like to shout out everyone who was able to attend the return of AMTA's Drawdown Dinner. We had a lot of fun at the River Cree, and it was great to see you all. Speaking of events, AMTA's 88th annual conference takes place April 22nd and 23rd, 2026 at the Grey Eagle Event Center in Calgary. Registration and sponsorship opens in early November. And in tandem with conference registration, please do keep an eye out for the opening of AMTA's award nominations. We all know someone who goes above and beyond in the fields of safety, was a trailblazer of industry, a supplier who might have turned your business around, a friend to industry, or even an AMTA staff member who goes above and beyond. Those folks deserve to be recognized, and this is your opportunity to do so. Award winner prizes include tickets for 2 to our awards celebration, a night at the Grey Eagle, and a cash prize. Start thinking about who you could nominate today. Do you have any questions or comments about the Steering Change episodes, particularly today's? Please do reach out on our Instagram at AMTA_CA or LinkedIn and Facebook at Alberta Motor Transport Association. Stay safe and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of AMTA's Steering Change podcast. The views expressed by guests of the Steering Change podcast are their own and may not reflect the views of AMTA, its hosts, or sponsors. Did you have a question that you would like answered on an upcoming episode of the Steering Change podcast? We want to hear from you. To submit a question to the Steering Change mailbag, hit up our DMs on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram with the hashtag Steering Change, and your question will be answered either live on the podcast or by one of our SMEs here at AMTA. We ask that you share this episode with those in your network that could benefit from what we discussed today, and make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform so you can be notified when future episodes are released. You can learn more about us and our mission by visiting www.amta.ca. Now get out there and have a safe day.